So what I'm going to cover today is primarily going to be our data sheets, how to fill those out, the protocols, some of that information, and then directly after I talk, which I'll try to talk quick, we're going to have an exercise, and I'll talk a little bit more about it, but some of you have already picked up the data sheets. You don't have to have it while I'm talking because I'll be showing you the tables and things, but then if you want to participate in the exercise, which we have ducks, rubber duckies, modeling as our water birds, then you can pick up a data sheet and a clipboard. I've got more clipboards under that table, and you can go out there and do the exercise. So I'll just get right into it here. So for the rookery habitat monitoring, there's basically 3 parts to the data sheet, just like in the foraging monitoring, and some of this is modeled even though we're collecting slightly different data. We want information on the site. We want obviously the survey count or the bird numbers that we can get, and then say it again. Estimation. When we say count, we're talking estimation. And then, of course, we want to know as much of the disturbance as possible. So our survey equipment is going to be really similar to if you're already doing the foraging monitoring. You're going to need binoculars because you're not going to be able to get very close. If you have a scope, you can use a scope, especially if there's a fixed place like, you know, we talk about Struvy Lucy. It appears, now I haven't done it myself, but it appears if you made friends with somebody who has a dock right there, you could probably set up a scope and do a count right there by land and not even need a kayak or a boat. You probably have to make friends with whoever built their house there. But field guides to just kind of identify those birds, and when we go through the exercises out here, you're going to see, you know, the difference in coloration between the beaks of the Caspian terns and the royal terns. You know, you can take that field guide out there with you and just help refresh your memory. Clipboards, of course, something to write with, and then data sheets. What we're going to recommend for most folks that are going to be in a boat or in a kayak is the write and rain paper, and we have a budget for that. So if you are doing, you know, regular monitoring of the Rookery Islands where you're not walking out there, you have to get out there by some kind of water vessel, then we can work with you to get those data sheets with the write and rain paper, and you fill them out with usually pen or pencil works great too. And then that way, if you happen to tump or just get a little splash, you don't have to rewrite everything. And then, of course, since we're sending you out in the field, most folks know this, but just in case, we want you to, you know, take water with you out there, wear field-appropriate clothes, especially as we get closer to the summer. It gets really, really warm, and the first part of your morning might feel cool, and then as soon as it hits 11 o'clock, you're sweating. So just be prepared, bring some snacks, make sure you have protection from the sun, the weather, and the bugs, because they're out there. And then some things to consider, and this has kind of come up a little bit more as I'm working with, you know, my own foraging monitoring and other people doing, is you can fill out as much information on your data sheets as possible. Some of my, I don't want to say everybody's smart, but some of the smarter folks, that's not me, have the electronic versions of the data sheets, and they have all their stuff filled out, and then they just print it. Now, of course, I haven't done that yet. But what we'll do for the Rookery data sheets is we'll have an Excel file that you can save and do a save as, and then, of course, we'll have the PDF that you can just print out. So, but because some of these, particularly by boat and kayak, we don't really want you to be writing as much. We've cut down on a lot of the site information. So it's slightly different, and we'll go over that more. But fill out as much as you can before you go. It's going to make life easier. We'll use the waterproof paper, and I mentioned that Write and Rain, we can give some supplies for folks. We can even have it printed out. And then if you're going to be, boats will generally have some kind of anchor. But if you want to kayak and do this, consider some sort of anchor source for your kayak, because you may want to do primarily your count from a fixed point. You're definitely going to want to do your writing from a fixed point. I'm speaking from experience when I say sometimes I'm out in an area in a kayak and I'm paying attention to something else, and then I hear that sound that sounds like a crushing can, and that's me getting hung up on an oyster reef. And it's very unpleasant. So I always, it's kind of like driving and putting on makeup. Like, those two things don't work well. I really have to focus. If I'm in a motorized or even a paddling vehicle, I got to pay attention to what I'm doing. So having just an anchor that you can just throw over and kind of get yourself hooked is usually really nice. And then that way you can actually do some counting with your binoculars and writing stuff down. The other thing that Amanda did mention, which is extremely useful, and this is always fun because then you have a buddy. And I would almost recommend, if anybody does buy kayak, unless it's a place you're super familiar with or you like have a safety whistle or something, go with someone else. Because what we always do on those annual counts is we have at least 2 people. And one person counts and then calls the number and the other person records. It makes it so much easier. I know they do that on Christmas bird count to make life easy too. So consider that as you're going out and doing these. Okay, so here's a snapshot of what the site information part of the data sheet. Notice there's very little information about weather events. We are trying to streamline this a lot more because you're not everybody's going to be sitting on a dock or in a lawn chair doing a count. So we basically want the basics, what the names, the dates, the times, and then I'll go into some of this a little more in detail to kind of explain what we're looking for. So our colony code and our name. This is going to be assigned by the Texas Colonial Waterbird Society. We've had to, we're conforming because they need this data really more than just Tern does. But when we began with the foraging monitoring, we had a lot more liberties. Like, we created the site codes and we created the names, and so a lot of this is going to be conformed. So it's not going to be a nice, your code is going to be HAR0001. It's actually going to be a series of random numbers, and again, stick it on your data sheet. You don't have to remember it again. They're really responsible for the annual counts. So anything that we provide is supplementary and is very, very helpful, but we're not ultimately responsible for the outcome of how many birds there are out there. The colony code, so here's the code will be given by Amanda based on that code that links up. Now, the colony name we have a little more liberties with, and so I believe, to keep it simple, there are colony code names, and I'll talk a little bit more in detail about that. But for simplicity's sake, what we're going to do is reference your colony name with the site that you're monitoring. So your colony name could be what the Texas Colonial Waterbird's calling it, or it could be something as simple as, I'm going to monitor Marker 52, so your colony name could be the Marker 52 colony.
Just to give you guys a little background on where the colony codes come from, actually the Colonial Waterbird Society cut this data using longitudinal squares. So long lines for each squares, right? So everything in the square around West Bay, we've numbered 600-something. So each square has a beginning number 600. When you get down south, there's 614, 618.
Yeah.
And then that second set of numbers is that individual. So north here, don't quote me on this, but it's like 600-302 or so.
Yeah.
So those numbers are assigned by the Waterbird Society. So if you find a new one or you don't know if it's an existing one, send it to us. We'll tell you what it is.
Exactly. So that, just to recap, it's a pretty complicated system. We're not going to reinvent the wheel. We're going to go with what they have. But you'll be relying on us much more to get this colony code and the colony name. But if you're just out there kayaking in Marker 52 or Sturvey Lucy, then as far as the colony name, this is always something that I do as a reference to people. I know who is at what spot. I cannot match up people with series of letters and numbers. It just doesn't work. So the colony name is really more for me, and the colony code is really for Amanda. But it's worked out nicely with the foraging. So we're going to keep it simple for Tern. Oops, too far. Okay, so here's some more information. Obviously the survey date is really important when you're doing, your estimation counts. The latitude and longitude, so here's kind of where, and I think I have another place I'll talk about, so I won't go into too much. But This is your reference to the spot that you're doing your monitoring. So I have interesting things that happen with the foraging survey, and it's actually okay. We're kind of, we started this last fall, and it's completely expanded and really exploded is kind of a good word, and in a good way, explosion. And so it's one of those things where, for the simplicity's sake, take a lat long for your spot, okay, that you're going to survey. A lot of folks will take a lat long, maybe if they're at a big park, at 2 different places. For foraging, that works okay, but for this, we'll just take one lat long. That'll be your spot that you survey, whether you go all the way around the island where you stay at a fixed point, or whether you just go a distance of 500 meters.
Basically, the lat long is so when we put it on a map, you can zoom in.
Yeah.
Not meant to be
And I'll go into a little more detail about whether you want to do the whole island, half the island, that kind of thing. Obviously, the observer names, that helps us identify you, so if we have questions, we can contact you. The new colony, so there's if you'll look at your data sheets on here, right under lat long, there's new colony, there's previously known colony, and then there's previously known colony with account and description update. So when we created this data sheet, well, that's a term used loosely because we didn't really create it. We took the Texas Colonial Waterbird data sheet and we adapted it so it was much more user friendly. And so one of the things that they are looking for is new colonies that they did not know about, and then they have previously known colonies that they're here every year. And then there's an option for a previously known colony with a description update. This might be a case where the Texas City Dike, I'll use that as an example. We had some skimmers out there nesting years ago, and the last couple of years we've gone out there and there's no skimmers. If they choose to come back, and let's say they did a whole revamp of the Texas City Dike, that might be a scenario where we want a description update because things have definitely changed. There's more concrete, there's more this, there's more that, there's benches, those types of things, or habitats change. For most of us, if we help you find a site or it's kind of obvious it's one of those Rookery Islands, it's going to be a previously known colony, and you can check with us for sure. If it's a new colony, this will be happening for some of you folks that are looking more inland or these small little pocket sites like the place in Alvin. So we can work with you on a new, either getting a new name for the colony, but again, it'll be kind of dictated by what we've had in past history and then, of course, what's going on in the present. And then we will pretty much not ask for a description update unless it's a real special case. So it's one of those things you could kind of send us your data sheet or with an email or a notation that says, actually probably we'll get your data sheet, look at the lat long and be like, hey, we haven't had any birds here in a long time. Let's get a description update. So I'll talk a little bit about that. I don't want to go into it too far because it involves another form, yay, which I haven't even introduced too much. But these are the habitat assessment forms. So we'll prompt you if we need a description update. Otherwise, you're just going to do a previously known count only. We might want them for new sites. So if it's a spot we have never seen before, we kind of want to know what the plant communities are like. And then I've already given some examples of why. These habitat assessment forms we had created, number one, to understand the area and the plant communities and what's going on there. It also tells us a little bit about what kind of management work that we need to look forward to going to fall. So I would be pretty safe saying if it's an area that needs a habitat assessment, I'll go out with you or I'll do some pretty thorough training so you understand, because not everybody is going to be comfortable identifying plants, and I haven't even done a bird nerd on it yet, so we'll get to that, but I'll be working with you very closely. Primarily, these habitat assessments, they cover plant communities, habitat types, erosion, and the physical degradation due to human disturbance, so that's like tons of trash or that sort of thing. So that's a whole other ball game, but it may come up more for these rookery sites that we didn't know about or that were old, abandoned, and then you're using them again, than we've really seen them with the foraging habitats. And like I said, I'll be happy to train you or just go out to that site with you and just go over it, and then because I'm pretty good with plants. So a little more on the site information. The survey. Certain time of day actually does not matter as much. Well, let's see what Amanda says. What do you say?
Typically in the summer, we try to do them first thing in the morning.
Okay.
Because it's cooler for us, first of all.
Yeah.
And birds seem to be kind of in for the mornings before they've all taken off to go foraging.
Okay. So mornings are probably best for humans and birds? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. If it's cooler, then that case may still be mornings or late afternoons. Yeah, when they come back into roost would probably also be a very good choice. Yes. Good point. Yeah, very good point. So active sites, that's basically, we know the colony's there and the birds are there. An inactive site, this will be another example like the Texas City Dike. We might have someone go out there and monitor that and there's no birds there. So that's an inactive site. Basically the birds are there, it's active, birds are not there, it's inactive. Your survey times, just put in when you start to survey and when you stop. One thing that has been fine is if you stop your survey and you start observing more birds, this will be very different than the foraging, because in the foraging we were looking at flying overs and people coming in, birds coming in and birds leaving. This you're just doing your estimation count. So if more birds come in and your survey's done and you're ready to go and get your sandwich, then just cut it off. It's okay, because we're just getting the estimation here. We're not counting heads. Our census participants, that's a hard word for me to say. These are just those good reminders. Again, this was taken right from the Texas Colonial Water Bird data sheets. So a lot of these folks, these reminders are for folks that have been doing this maybe once a year and they got to go through the refresher, but it's still a pretty good reminder. And the 50 yards away reference, think half a football field. So that's like your minimum. And then Amanda kind of went over some of the behaviors. That's going to be your real take home as far as how close you can get, is their behavior. But you can just think of half a football field away is a pretty safe bet unless you're seeing some behavior changes. And then the survey vantage and the access point, that's a real simple one. Just circle how you got out there, because if we want to revisit that site, we'll have to look on there and see, did you walk there, did you kayak, and then we have to make arrangements to get out there by boat or by foot. Okay, so then we'll go into the actual colony count. And again, I'm using the word count loosely because it's just an estimate. So, this hundreds of birds can be really overwhelming, and, whether you're in a boat or a kayak, you're going to be moving up and down, unless it's like Lake Placid out there where it's very still. But even then, you're going to have a little bit of wind and drift and currents. So kind of keep that in mind. That's really why we designed it to just be a nice estimate of circle what you need, and you can get out there. We also put in preloaded birds. So these are the birds we want to see. The foraging, we've been kind of including everything because we've got some great people putting stuff on eBird for us and all that good stuff. But for these, we're mainly looking at nesting birds, so we have all the birds loaded. If there's something unusual and you really think it's breeding and it's not on here, write it in a side note on the comments and then consult with Amanda. If it's something we definitely need to add, we'll add it. But for the most part, this is what the Texas Colonial Water Bird people count, and so we're not going to veer too far. When you're doing your counts, you can kind of keep in mind that, just like Amanda said, you might be able to see 25, but then you can see these little pockets, and so that little white blob behind the bush is probably another bird, and maybe there's more in there. You can include that in your estimation, or you can just say, I'm counting what I know for sure is a bird, and that's it. So because we're getting estimated numbers here, that's very okay to either count only what you can see, or you can just say, I see 50, and then there's probably maybe 75 total with the little fluff I can see between the green splotches. That's good too. Okay. These estimations are not going to take place of the official count, so we're off the hook. That's a big responsibility as far as reporting how well the birds are doing every year. However, the consistency of getting out there even once a month is a huge help to the Texas Colonial Water Bird Society. There's no way they could get out there even once a month, even visit one of those places once a month. They have all you know, I don't want to say lives, but they have professional careers that prevent them from going out. So that is the main thing that this group is going to be helping with, is having these eyes on the islands to start pay attention to trends that are happening, primarily with disturbance. So one of the things, I know Amanda, she really tries to practice getting out there at least once a week and just surveying. It's not a big thing. She just goes out there and kind of looks and sees, is there anything unusual? That's a little more of what you'll be doing, but of course more spread out. So a lot of things that will happen is if we have a real unusual count, and I'll just say a random example. You're monitoring Struve-Lucy. One day when you're out there, you're seeing between 25 and 200 birds, and everything, you know, looks healthy and all the spaces are filled, and some days maybe it's 200. You go out there the next week or the next 2 weeks, and you're seeing less than 25 birds. That means something happened in between. So what's going to be incredibly useful is we're going to pull up your data sheets that you've been monitoring before that event, because we don't know what happened, nobody witnessed anything, and then after, and that's going to help us estimate, like, what could have happened. Was the tide so low that, like, a dog or a stray cat wandered up on the island, or raccoons got up there, or did somebody land with a boat? Those are types of things that you guys are going to help us keep an eye on. Amanda?
And I didn't really talk about it, but especially our tern and skimmer colonies are prone to washouts.
Yes.
So if there is a storm that comes through or an unusually high tide for a while, the water will wash up and take out nests and chicks. So if you're out there and the colony, like Kari said, suddenly disappeared, and you see a lot of rack, and you know that there's been a storm recently, we could probably infer that a washout.
Yes, so just a reference for the recording, you know, weather events also impact the bird's nest. And so you guys would be the first people to actually observe that change and the dynamics or the change in numbers of birds, whereas we might not even notice it until a month, and by that time, you know, we might not be seeing the rack line, we might not have even noticed that there was a storm, or it might have happened a month ago and we just, you know, haven't been out there to see it. So that's really the biggest benefit to having you guys out there monitoring. Also recording which birds show up first. You know, we have an idea of that sort of thing. What we don't have is the hardcore data and the data sheets to say, this is what someone recorded. The gray blues were there February 28th, and they were nesting. You know, they were looking for nest spots. Or, you know, brown pelicans showed up April 15th, and a lot of them had nests, and it looked like they were sitting down incubating or laying eggs. You know, those are the types of things that we really need to make some better management decisions, and that's what you guys will be providing. And then, of course, the stages, observe. So when are they building nests? What species are building it? And that was part of, let me make sure I'm not going to cover. When we go over the table, that's my next slide, I'll get an opportunity to kind of show you how easy it's going to be to document these stages. And then, where you survey, the consistency is going to be the key. So if you choose North Deer Island as your survey spot, what's going to matter to us more, maybe I'll use marker 52 as a better example. Marker 52, typically by boat, it's very easy to get in the intercoastal waterway. However, the backside, I know from experience, we don't have a lot of experience doing surveys from the backside of Marker 52 because it's very shallow, there's marsh, and there's lots of oyster reefs. So if you're a kayaker and you want to paddle out to Marker 52 and you're not really comfortable going on the ship channel side, stick to the backside. If you'll consistently monitor either one point or one side of the island or the whole island, that will give us really great data. And you don't necessarily need to put yourself in harm's way or get into a place where it's just outside your comfort zone. Having that consistency of data is much more important. And we can document in the file that as we're collecting your data sheets that this is probably about half of the count of the island because they're only looking at the backside of Marker 52. It's still very, very useful for us. But we want you to be safe because, you know, now we're not really sending you out into little marshes or the state park or a little county park. Now we're kind of getting you out into areas. So your personal comfort zone and safety is our number one priority. The bird count, you know, is important to us, but it comes second. So here's a snapshot of the second section of the data sheet. All the birds are listed. You're just going to circle your estimation and the numbers of birds that you're seeing. And then, of course, if you see nests present, circle yes. If you see chicks present, yes. If you see fledgling present, you can circle yes on that. So I won't spend too much time there. But what I will do is just some frequently asked questions that came up with me and some other folks that are looking forward to starting this process. If there's well over 200 birds, but you know that there's got to be like close to 500 or 1,000, you can mark that on your comment section, but it's not a huge deal. It's one of those things, if it's over 200 birds, we know it's a lot. If it's closer to like thousands of birds, and you just want to be like, I want it documented that there's probably over 1,000 birds here, go ahead and write that in. What we may do as we progress, if we decide that this is a significant piece, is we might even put something between 500 and 1,000. But really, we're just interested, is there a little bit of birds, is there medium, and is there huge birds? So it's something you can put in the comment section. If you can identify the bird's nest and fledgling and chicks, notate what you can observe. Now, some of them will have maybe 2, probably not all 3. And it's possible, because a lot of times if some of the birds have come in from another area or there's space available because of some disturbance, they might be trying again, kind of like the skimmers did. For the most part, you may see nests and chicks. Some of them you'll be seeing chicks and fledgling. Just circle what applies, for the most part, what you can observe. But when we talk about nests, we're mainly talking about nest building. So obviously when the chicks are there and the fledglings are there, there will be a nest. But when we reference nest, it's primarily, are they building nests? Maybe eggs, but we can't see the eggs.
Sorry, Kari.
Yes.
But the nest, chicks, eggs, fledgling question is not a deal breaker.
Yeah.
Like, I've looked, and I just can't see chicks, and it's been 4 weeks, and they've got to have chicks by now. First of all, a lot of these species are really good at hiding their chicks.
Yeah.
Second of all, if you don't want you to get on an island or cause a disturbance, then
Right.
you try to figure out what stage they're at. Just knowing they're still there is good.
Exactly. So just to reference that, it's primarily, it's not a deal breaker. It's one of those opportunistic things. If you can see it, mark it. If you can't see it, don't sweat it. Because obviously they're on that island for a reason. we know what they're up to on there. And then if we see other birds flying or hanging out that are not necessarily on the list, again, that's kind of something you can put in the comments section. We're mainly worried about our birds on the list. However, if there's like something unusual, like a predator bird, and you start to observe that there's some disturbance, there's a raptor flying around, then you may want to put in the comments section, it looked like it was a red-tailed hawk, and it looked like it was swooping pretty close, and the birds were freaking out. We also have, of course, I'll get into our disturbance section, and so that would be a really good thing for disturbance. But that's pretty much the only time we want to hear about another bird. We're going to be selective for these surveys. Not that we don't love them, but we don't want to mark too much. Banded birds, I just put this in a reference. You may be seeing more of these banded birds than you saw in foraging. So just keep in mind, we've got, I'll get up a better reference link, but it's one of those things, if you can take pictures, great. If you can identify what orientation the band was and the color of the band, if you can even read the band, that's great. It's one of those things, too, if you're out there and you're just like, I couldn't even get close enough, but it looked like there was something green on its leg, and it probably is a band. Let us know. We might even be able to go out there and try to take a better look. But you can mark down as much information as you can get from the banded birds, or take a picture is always the easiest things, then you don't have to remember anything. And we'll try to identify what bird was out there. So then the disturbance portion, that's our section 3. Some of them are very similar. We're interested in human disturbance. We're also interested in other disturbance like other birds. If you see a laughing gull, if you see a raptor coming through, or you just see some opportunistic laughing gulls eating baby chicks, you can definitely record that. You'll really be watching for the signs that the birds are disturbed. And fortunately for the Rookery Islands, I believe that the signs that there's disturbance is going to be pretty obvious. They're going to be calling or they're going to be flushing, and so you'll pretty much know right away. Whereas in a foraging, an egret that maybe flies picks up flies and just kind of moves away from a fisherman. That is disturbance, but it's not super obvious. So this will be, just really watch for the birds. Make sure that we're not the cause. Amanda already drilled that, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. But again, it's one of those things like the foraging. You get there, you kind of get settled, and then you start doing your stuff. So that if you get there and you're starting to settle and the birds are all kind of moving around, you may need to just back up a little bit until they're calm and relaxing and starting some of their relaxation techniques, preening, that sort of thing. Then you can do. And then we want you to record anything that could result in a mortality. And I'm going to go into this a little more detail in a few slides. But whether it's birds on bird mortality, that kind of sounds weird, or whether it's caused by human disturbance, we want you to record it, write it down as much as you can. Obviously, if humans are approaching the islands, if it seems like a nice family and they've got their radio blasting and, you know, they're like trying to attract dolphins with their music, and you may feel comfortable, you kind of not going to say, you know, these birds are nesting and I know the dolphins love your jams, but these birds may not, and see how they're kind of acting. You may feel comfortable there. If it's something you're not comfortable with, we'll just report it. We're not even going to play the game of the Good Samaritan, especially if it's people that maybe you wave to them and they don't respond properly. Just, you know, cut your losses.
We do have some brochures for those of you that may be out
Okay.
and come across it. We do have some fishermen and play brochures, which are really great to hand to somebody when you're asking them to please move away. It talks about the birds, it talks about disturbance, it has the ID section in the middle. So we can give you a little handful of those to keep on your phone.
Yes, and those brochures that she's talking about that you can hand out to the public, they're excellent. They're excellent talking point because they're on waterproof paper, so they can stay in your boat or your kayak, and they've got pictures of all the birds. So it really can be an approach like, hey, did you know what kind of local birds we have here? And talk to them, and then kind of segue into, you know, we have to be real careful about these in rookery settings. But so we'll have some of those brochures that you can take with, and we just put an order in for tons and tons and tons. So 10,000 approximately. So we'll be able to give you more of those. But what I'm really trying to get to the point is, if you're going to be responsible for doing counts, you're not responsible for other people's behavior. If you feel comfortable talking to somebody and you're just a friendly person anyway, great. If you're not really a people person and you just like birds better, we're not going to ask you to approach anybody, okay? Because I know what that's like. I work with someone like that. So the disturbance section, here's the snapshot. It's really similar to the foraging. I think it's pretty mirror. But we want to know quantities, if you can get quantities, about approximation, duration. Was it 5 minutes, less than 5 minutes, 15 minutes? And then, of course, the result or effect. You know, what happened, the birds flushed, you know, chicks were taken. That's the information that we're wanting to know. Oops, going too far. So I'm going to get into the regulations a little bit. Anytime you're uncomfortable, just go ahead and call the game warden. At this point, there's enough laws, regulations, and we're trying to do enough public service announcements that if you are observing some human disturbance and you're not comfortable, just call. And we'll actually put, number is actually on your data sheet, the front and the back, just so you don't have to flip it over to get to it. Do you have a question? The Galveston County area. So if you're outside of Galveston County, we can help you identify the game warden number. It's through Texas Parks and Wildlife. They have them everywhere. So, and they have tons. So that's not necessarily what we do, but they're responsible for these types of things. So we'll just call that number. Like Amanda mentioned, these birds are very heavily protected. And what's interesting is, you know, I was not going to put up the actual legislation. But as I'm reading through it, someone who's unknowingly just walking across a rookery and results in young that are dead, what that is considered is take. So in the eyes of the law, what they do is they consider if you go and decide you want a little baby tern chick to rear as your own, pet, the same as just walking across a rookery and, causing tons of baby chicks. So they take that very, very seriously, and they probably would look at the scenarios slightly different, but as far as what the law's written, they're not distinguishing between people who are capturing those birds and selling them to people in South America or just someone that didn't know that they weren't supposed to be on the island. And that plays a big role in why we put out those huge yellow signs that say, stay off these islands. In fact, we've heard a lot of success stories where people put snake breeding islands and people stay off of them, but we don't want to just be blatantly lying. It's not really lying because there's definitely snakes out there. But they take this very seriously, and so you can too. Yes, sir.
So in Texas, on navigable waters, it's all considered public.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody is in fact fishing and comes up within the 50 yards, but they are not on the rotary, technically they have a broken.
Yeah. So for someone who may be kayaking or fishing close to the Rookery Islands, but not necessarily on, they wouldn't be in a violation of trespassing, but they would be in a violation of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. Because if they're disturbing the birds enough that they're considered take. Yes, and that's why our brochures and basically the front page of those brochures that you can take with you and hand out, they say fish, swim, and play from 50 yards away. That's the general rule that they're going with. Again, here's the number again, but it's on your data sheet. So if you notice and you want to report a violation, you need to know like the who's, what's, whens, and wheres of everything. And then you call this number and you're out in your kayak, or you can get a safe distance. Sometimes if it's a boat, what's nice is if you can take a picture of their license. So if they suspect anything and they're just like going to hightail out, you can still report it. But when they answer the phone and you tell them what you're calling for, they're going to ask you who you are. They're going to ask you who's the violator, and you're going to say, I don't know, some guy, Joe Schmo. But you're going to need to give a description of the person, the vessel they're in, and then, of course, if you can get any kind of description of the boat and the little numbers, plates, and stuff, that's the best. And they're going to want to know, was it just people or was it, dogs or anything else? They're going to want to know what, so basically what we're recording here on the disturbance, what they were doing that violated the law. It's not going to be very difficult to tell them when it comes to these Rookery Islands. And then, of course, when the violation occurred, you're going to have that information from your times and your dates. And then where. The good news is because we're training you really well on where you're doing these surveys, you're actually going to have the Latin long. And the game wardens are going to love you for that because they rely on that too. So what I'll do for more of this information is I will have, we now have a resource page for our Audubon Tern site, and I will put this information on the Audubon Tern website. And then actually, I noticed I have this big space here, so I actually might go ahead and fill, as I revamp this data sheet and get it ready, I might just have a small box that says all this information. So if you're out there, you've got to report it, you already know what you need to tell them.
And that's a good point. Remember, guys, this is the first time we're trying this.
Yeah.
So you guys are guinea pigs. As the season goes along, if you have ideas of how to improve the data, let Kari know, and we'll take it into account. We want this to be user-friendly.
Yes, yeah. As user-friendly as possible. So any feedback you're giving me is good feedback because you guys are out there doing it. And then when it comes to data submission, we don't have our online database. We're still working out the kinks. You can get your data sheets. Review the protocols at our audubonturn.org. There is some information on the Texas Audubon site, which you could go to. It just takes a little longer. And then returning them, if you will email me any scanned or filled out data sheets to the Turn at audubon.org, it's a little easier for me to keep track of them on the Turn at audubon.org, or you can mail them and drop them off at our Texas City office, or, like David does, he just brings them to me, and I'm okay with that too, because I'm, at least as far as the Bay Area master naturalist, I'm usually around. So, is there any questions on the data sheets? Yes, sir. Okay, so here's what we'll do, and I knew I was, question, sorry.
I do know it would be a benefit to everybody to clarify the difference between a shaker and floodplain. Sometimes
okay.
to
So, Amanda, do you want to cover briefly chicks and fledgling? And maybe we're going to have more information on this, maybe like a slideshow or another little presentation, just so you see pictures. But oh, yes, I can.
So, the difference between a chick and a fledgling. At first glance, for me, it's behavior and where they are. Herons and egrets, if they're still in the chick stage, they're going to be hanging out in the nest. They're going to be close together. They're going to be waiting for mom and dad to come back. Fledglings, you'll see, start to hang out on the shoreline because they're kind of fishing for themselves, but they're kind of still being bums off mom and dad. Terns are kind of tricky because they're little bums way past nesting season. I mean, we had one guy who sat out here like straight through January, and any term that came by was like, beep, beep, beep. Ways you can tell, get your bird book out. You'll see information on first-year birds, juvenile birds, so you can look at the primaries, the markings. It's the development of those wing feathers and just going from fuzzy balls fluff to
fluff.
Things that could possibly fly. Then that is another indicator. If they're actually being able to fly, even if they're like pelicans and they've managed to take a few crazy in the air but don't go anywhere, we will consider that a fledgling. So it's location, where they are on the island, it's what they look like, does it line up with your bird book, and it's a little bit of behavior as well.
Yeah, what I envision as far as is what would be an easy reference for you is your chicks are really not too mobile. So if they're in the nest and they just look like a cute little fuzzy ball of fluff, primarily those are your chicks. When you're fledglings, they'll be much more mobile. They may not even be hanging out in the nest, but they will also start to develop more of those feathers that we, look for. So I know I know as far as the pelicans are concerned, when they're chicks, they look like little pterodactyls. They're like purple pterodactyls. Okay, and then they get to a stage where they're between chicks and fledgling, where they're the white fuzzy footballs, and they don't really have feathers. And then, of course, when they're fledgling, they start to really look more like their adults. They have those longer feathers, and they're very much moving around and mobile. But I think having a series of pictures and photos, we'll have that resource pretty quick.
If you're going to be studying a site for a while, like say you pick one that's got a royal tern colony on it, terns are infamous for once those kids can get up and run around, they're running.
Yeah.
And they form these little
toddlers,
these little creches, and they run around as a big group, and they kind of stay in those big groups. So if you have questions, like if you know you're going to start seeing a tern colony regularly, come talk to us. We can show you.
Yeah, we will definitely help you in that process. Okay, so any other questions on the data sheets? Yes, sir.
Not to belabor frequency. You kind of implied a minimum of once a month.
Yes.
This thing is a little bit bell-shaped.
Yes.
When you do it. I mean, there's a period where things are really going big time,
and
then all of a sudden,
right,
a lot of stuff is gone. So, if you were doing a place where you didn't have to deal with the logistics of the boat and all that stuff, you probably would recommend a period where people might want to speed up the frequency.
Around the peak season.
Right.
Well, because you're volunteers, we don't want to say you have to anything because you're doing this on your own free time. Here's what has been happening, at least with the foraging. When there's action, when there's stuff going on, people want to get out there more. When it's slow and it's hot and it's very uncomfortable, people are going out there less. So for the consistency of how frequently you go out to monitor, we're going to accept a minimum of once a month. However, as you start to get out there and you start seeing them build nests, and then you start seeing them sit on those nests, and then you start seeing chicks happen, you can monitor as frequently as you want, particularly through the peak season, which is going to be March through May?
Depends on the species.
Depends on the species. April and May are peak seasons, and usually pretty great weather. With that being said, as we get into June and July, it's still technically nesting season, but there's probably not going to be as much action. If you want to, not go out there as frequently, it's hotter, then that is still very acceptable as far as the monitoring.
If I could say a target, it would be once a week.
Yeah, once a week is a good target. You can get out there more, you could also get out there less. Because really, before really Turn has been around, we've had one count once a year. That's it. And we may have been able to catch a disturbance event here and there, but most of the time it was after the fact. So we have nothing. We have no baseline data. So whether you're giving us stuff once a week or once a month, I mean, it's so much better than once a year. So we'll be very flexible. But I have a feeling, just like the forging was very contagious, when you start seeing those babies and you start seeing those babies grow up, you're probably going to be out there more than you realize. And that's okay, as long as you're having fun. I mean, that was really the whole point.
And I will warn you, you're going to get territorial.
Yeah.
These are my babies.
Yeah. And that's okay, because really, that's kind of the attitudes we're wanting to go with this.